Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday. On April 6, 2022, Tucker Carlson took aim at someone no one had ever heard of on his then evening Fox News show. Carlson, at that point becoming so radioactive to the quote-unquote conservative news world, kept taking shots at who he viewed the most sinful to Donald Trump's MAGA movement and coalition: establishment Republican politicians. He wrote a book with lampoonish drawings of Lindsey Graham, Bill Kristol, and Mitch McConnell on them. He regularly rebuked them on his nightly show. He called them impotent and selfish oafs, which of course they were. This type of behavior was dangerous for someone like Tucker Carlson, of whom himself was just as swampy as the rest of the swamp creatures he regularly targeted, at least on paper. It was the same type of behavior that would get him later fired from Fox News a little more than a year later. But it was then, and still is today, the right behavior to take. Conservatives, as we've talked about several times on this show, and we will continue to talk about on this show, are supposedly the part of values, the traditionalists, the people that want to see things like faith, family, and freedom championed, at least in theory. But to put it mildly, our quote-unquote conservative leadership class, particularly of yesteryear, is not that at all. In fact, they aren't conservative at all. They were the same mild, half-baked liberals as those on the, quote, other side of the aisle. They went to the same dinner parties. They attended the same alumni gatherings. They licked the right boots of their corporate donor class. Their summer homes in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard were right down the street from one another. They were, quite literally, almost no different between them at all, from policy preferences to vacation destinations. Tucker Carlson was the only one in corporate media, and big-time corporate media, to point out this inconvenient fact. He was regularly scorned by it by fellow hosts Sean Hannity, Brian Kilmeade, and Mark Levin, even though they themselves, of course, never had the guts to bring it up to him personally. This is because, of course, they live the same lifestyle as the politicians they covered. For all the talks of quote-unquote collusion that's dominated the airwaves over the last 5 years from Russia to Israel, that type of collusion has still, to this day, never been pointed out. However, in this monologue, one that would be heralded among his best, he did not take aim at Graham, Kristol, or McConnell. Instead, he took aim at the then and current governor of Utah, Spencer Cox. Cox, of the same milquetoast breed of quote-unquote conservative politician as all of the aforementioned people, was not who he said he was. He was described by Carlson as a, quote, cut-rate Gavin Newsom imitator and a, quote, low-IQ weekend MSNBC anchor. This is harsh criticism. Carlson himself was blasted for it. How dare you attack one of your own? The radical left is destroying this country. Talk about how dumb Joe Biden is. Rah! Those are the easy talking points. Those are the talking points that the boomers and the think tank executives who watch Fox News did so for. But they were also the easy conversations to have, the obvious conversations to have. Everyone knew that political unity was advantageous, that the leftist plague in our society was terminal, and that Joe Biden was a buffoon. There was no meaningful ground to be gained there. It was Carlson's job, therefore, to have the tough conversations, the necessary conversations. One of these conversations that so desperately needed to be had, but what wasn't being had at all, was one about conservatives, leaders, politicians, and men like Spencer Cox. Cox, like most mainline conservatives over the last 40 years, had, quote, fallen right off into the ledge and into the deep end of vacuous lifestyle liberalism, said Carlson. Again, a bold claim to make, for sure. But the real question, the question no one on the so-called, quote, right asked, was the only question that mattered. Was it true? Carlson had plenty of data to back his claim. The biggest one was when Cox was giving a virtual town hall to a group of so-called LGBTQ high school students. This is an oxymoronic claim, obviously. These are children. They may feel things and are discovering some things about their expression and identity. But to make a claim about life-altering sexual identity and orientation at 14? A bit of a stretch, said any sane person up until approximately 45 minutes ago. But not to Spencer Cox. When a female student asked him a question with her, quote, she, her, hers pronouns attached, Cox had the following response, quote, my preferred pronouns are he, him, his, so thank you for sharing yours, end quote. It should be noted again, obviously, that this is absolutely insane. Utah is one of the most reliably conservative states in the country. It's a beacon of religious liberty. It holds by far the most Mormons than any other state in the union, for example. They voted for Donald Trump at about above a 60% rate. They have bigger family sizes. Their marriage rates are a lot better and happen a lot earlier and are a lot healthier. You would think that Spencer Cox, as a supposedly conservative person, would at least make a veiled attempt to reflect conservative values. But you'd be wrong. Instead, he chose to affirm a confused child's gender's pronouns by saying his own pronouns in front of her in a room in front of other confused children. Little did Spencer Cox recall, but he was violating his own rule because earlier in his career, after a horrific shooting at a gay nightclub, Cox commented that, quote, "I was the last person they wanted to hear from, a straight, white, Mormon, middle-aged Republican," end quote. Got it? It's not enough to state your gender pronouns as a quote-unquote conservative politician in the state of Utah. Now you have to disavow your race, religion, age, and political orientation as well. If the inverse of any of this were pulled, of course, Cox would be affirmed as quote, brave and, quote, a hero. But in both cases, this is wrong. It is not at all brave or heroic to publicly flog yourself for who you are. It's a symbol of your own humiliation and self-loathing. As Carlson put it in his monologue, Cox was now in the running to become, quote, America's guiltiest white guy. A tough task to win, especially in 2022, mind you. But that didn't stop him from trying. Because Cox backed this up with legislation as well. When other politicians such as Ron DeSantis were talking about the banning of critical race theory, a horrifying Marxist concept in schools, Cox was justifying it. He was working, quote unquote, across the aisle to install a, quote unquote, new curriculum with that same Marxist concept. In addition, he signed the so-called Utah Compact on Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. It called the current racist structure in the United States a, quote, system that can only be stopped with bold anti-racist actions and policies, end quote. Strangely enough, Cox didn't think it was racist to exclude white children from opportunities for scholarships and asked about it on a Zoom call, where he also was wearing a COVID obedience mask with a Utahian mountain range on it for some reason. But we all know the reason why, obviously. Not having quite enough of the LGBTQ agenda, Cox vetoed a piece of legislation called House Bill 11 that banned men from competing in women's sports within the state of Utah, as well as a bill that would have banned transgender surgeries for minors. Not only was Cox betraying his voters, but his own colleagues in state Congress. He must have just put in an order for a new desk plate with his pronouns attached. It's the only logical explanation. Perhaps the most revealing thing about Spencer Cox came from an article from Time magazine entitled, quote, Spencer Cox, the red state governor, not afraid to be, quote, woke. In it, the reporter asked, why rock the boat? Why step right into America's hottest culture war with no apparent political benefit? No apparent political benefit? Really? Again, the state of Utah has some of the most conservative-leaning people in the country. You don't even have to be conservative to not want to chop the body parts off of mentally confused children and not have your son dunk on your neighbor's daughter in a game of JV women's high school basketball. You just have to be a person with a functioning brain. Cox's answer to that question said it all. Quote, this idea that you're a coward for being kind, it's so anti-Christian, it's so anti-American, and I mean that, end quote. Anti-Christian to not chop off children's healthy body parts? Kindness is allowing women to break their faces on volleyballs spiked into them by men? Anti-American, like treasonous, the only crime directly spelled out in the United States Constitution that's punishable by death? On and on it went. Cox recycled the same garbage milquetoast right-wing talking points. He was a quote-unquote compassionate conservative. He wanted, quote, unity. He hit just about every buzzword you can imagine. Quote, deaths of despair, the quote, happiness gap, the quote, empathy crisis, the quote, trust barometer. He tried to appear trendy to people that hated his conservative constituents, saying that he reads The Atlantic magazine and admires the works of people like Thomas Friedman and Ezra Klein. He's more educated than you, obviously, smarter than you, and better as well. He was once an executive at a telecommunications company. Were you an executive at a telecommunications company? No? Shut up, you rube. Ask yourself, do these actions reflect the desires of the average Utah resident? Of course not. Spencer Cox is not at all a conservative, even though he claims to be. In that way, he's shameful. He doesn't stand up for the people that elect him. He slaps a label onto himself, cosplays as something he clearly isn't, and backstabs all of them on the way to the governor's house. He's in a red state, after all. He knows no one would dare to challenge him. This conservative apathy is a ticking time bomb that we need to get ahead of. It is slowly eating alive red states and conservative movements across the country, hollowing them from within. Conservatism and traditional values have not been set back because America has gone less conservative and traditional. In fact, it has done the exact opposite. There's data to prove it. Instead, the reason why values have gone by the decline is that conservative leadership has gone completely soft. It is the same in our policies as it is in our churches, our businesses, and our families. Most children in America grow up in a home predominantly with one parent. Pastors and priests preach a social gospel instead of the actual gospel, the eternity-altering words of Jesus Christ. Businesses don't have any values outside of their share price. Anything else, any ethical compass at all, is cut out for that idolatry of the almighty share price. Our problem in this country is plain and simple. Weak leaders in positions of leadership. Like men like Spencer Cox, men like James Lankford, John Cornyn, Mitch McConnell, Dan Crenshaw, Bill Cassidy, Joni Ernst, and so many others. Men who claim to be quote-unquote conservative, quote Christian or otherwise, and are counted on by their voters to be, but instead actually govern as they actually are, as who they actually are. Lifestyle liberals who ride the coattails of conservatism, while the people they've put into positions of responsibility to care for descend into hell. Which leads me to Charlie Kirk. 2 weeks ago, Charlie Kirk was assassinated in front of 3,000 students at Utah Valley University, the largest university in the state. A large accomplishment, consider that Brigham Young University, or BYU, and the University of Utah are far both bigger brands. To be abundantly clear, it was not Spencer Cox's fault that Charlie Kirk was murdered, that 3,000 students are traumatized for life, and that Charlie Kirk's family is left without a husband and a father. Spencer Cox, to his credit, sprung into action immediately. He immediately declared Kirk's assassination a terrorist threat and a political assassination. He condemned anyone who would celebrate something as demonic and evil as we saw 2 Wednesdays ago. He moved heaven and earth to find Tyler Robinson, the man who shot Charlie Kirk. On these measures, he should be commended, as he has already been. On the other hand, however, we must also address something. Charlie Kirk, as mentioned multiple times on this show and throughout the media rightly, was not a mean person. All outlets shamefully portraying him as such are wrong. Charlie Kirk was a very nice person. It's not necessarily the attacks on Charlie's character are baseless and dehumanizing, which of course they are, but it's just that they're incorrect. Charlie was a good person and took it to his heart that he acted as one as often as he could. His faith commanded him to, so he was. That said, there was no more fervent opposition force to people like Spencer Cox than Charlie Kirk. He tweeted multiple times correctly about how Cox must be immediately primaried and taken out of office. It wasn't that Charlie Kirk had something against Spencer Cox, because he didn't. He wasn't vindictive. It was that Charlie was something that Spencer Cox could never have been. A leader, a warrior for conservative Christian causes that most define the MAGA movement. Charlie Kirk was also the most loyal person to the head of the MAGA movement, Donald Trump, up until the day of his death. Anyone who crossed that Rubicon crossed Charlie Kirk, which you really didn't want to do. And now here we are. Charlie Kirk is dead by an assassin's bullet. The conservative movement is left without its defining political talent among young people, one of the great political organizers of all time, and potentially the greatest non-corporate evangelist of this era. There are an innumerable number of tragic things that we can say about the murder and assassination of Charlie Kirk. Yet as the dust is settling, conservatives are finally beginning to wake up to some of the things that are needing to be done, things that people like Charlie Kirk have been advocating for a very long time. One of those things, the thing I would argue we must do first, is that we must purge our leadership class of people like Spencer Cox, weak, spineless, impotent, useless people who do nothing but take up space so that people wired like Charlie Kirk can't rock the boat too much. This is not a time of quote-unquote compassionate conservatism and quote unity anymore. That was already over a long time ago. The bullet that Charlie Kirk took in the neck just made it abundantly clear, which is an indictment on all of us. Therefore, one of the best things we can do in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder is the following: the identification and removal of all cowardly, limp-dicked, and weak-kneed leaders in our movement as soon as humanly possible. We will not use force. We will not use violence. We will not use call to arms. As it has been made clear, those are tools of the left. Charlie would have hated it if we would have adopted them for ourselves. But, as proved by Charlie Kirk's assassination, as well as the murder of Irina Zarutska on a Charlotte subway and school children in Minneapolis, we are in a time of open war against value-oriented people, particularly Christian people of all stripes. Most of these events, shamefully, have happened under the guise of conservative leaders. This is an indictment on our leadership class, particularly our male leadership class. One of the best questions I've heard asked in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder was the following: why on earth was Charlie doing so much? A very big part of it is simple: because he wanted to. That's just who Charlie was. He was a worker. He was a grinder. He wanted to be productive, to be useful, and to inspire others to do so as well, to fulfill the command that God gave Adam in the garden, to work. But yet there's a more uncomfortable angle to this as well, what we're going to be dedicating this entire show to today. No one else had the guts to step up and do it. In particular, no other men had the guts to step up and do it. Charlie Kirk did so much for just being one person. But the most insightful part of Charlie's message, one that has hit home for me over the past 2 weeks, is that he knew he couldn't do it as one person. A huge part of Charlie's message was to get others, particularly other men, to step up to create a multiplier effect of Charlie Kirk's. More men stepping up to lead in church ministries, start families, open up companies, and raise children. And again, to his amazing credit, this has taken hold with young people. The youth vote delivered in the election for Donald Trump in November of 2024. It made them the most Christian and conservative generation on record, reversing a century of decline in both of those areas. They want to run for office. They want to start families. They want to get married. They want to go to church. They want to be entrepreneurial. But sadly, there are still men like Spencer Cox and other men of Gen X that are throwing cold water onto the fire that people like Charlie Kirk had awakened in Gen Z. They were too cool for school for people like Charlie Kirk. They viewed him as an annoyance rather than an asset. They would have much preferred if he simply went away, shut up, and never came back. The same is true with all people he inspired, by the way. And what have they done with that responsibility? Simply manage the slow but steady and sure decline of America to become a demoralized, dejected, and weak culture run by a demoralized, dejected, and weak leadership class. Turning America into a failed state by turning their eyes from the problems that needed to be fixed and by sending our young people into a nihilistic and suicidal, quite literally, death spiral. This is unacceptable. On my watch, and I believe on the watch of my entire generation, it will not continue. Now is not the time for weak-willed statements on social media or, quote, tough conversations with, quote, friends. No. Now is the time for brass knuckles. Now is the time for purging weakness from our cause and weak people along with it. No more pronouns. No more anti-racism. No more appeasement or apology for your skin color or your political beliefs or your religious faith. No more retreat. We advance. We play offense all the time. Not one single step back. Ever. So potentially my favorite person that I've been listening to over, I would say probably the past 6 months, up until he spoke at Mark Driscoll's men's gathering every single week, his men's ministry, Real Men, is Steve Deace. I've talked about Steve a couple times in the show, and I think Steve is unbelievably smart. He was a very close friend of Charlie's. And, Steve is, I believe, to be one of the most important voices currently in America, particularly for the Protestant evangelical Christian men's movement. I think that he's a wonderful man. I really hope to meet him in the future. And Steve, if you ever watch this, I keep going, dude. You're doing great stuff. And he delivered such a powerful tribute to Charlie after he was assassinated 2 weeks ago, and it really hit Steve very hard. And Steve was just a mess for a couple of days, to be honest. And now he, like many others in this movement of rising, and Steve is a middle-aged guy. I believe he's in his early 50s, but he is championing this exact point that Charlie was trying to make. And so, obviously, Steve has his own show on the Blaze TV. By the way, the Blaze TV is the best, by far, independent conservative media company in the world outside of TCN. And so if you're looking for anyone, please subscribe to The Blaze. It's awesome. And so like Glenn Beck and Sarah Gonzalez and all the people over there, they're great. And so anyway, but Steve has a show there. It's on every day, I believe, at 11 Central, 12 Eastern. I try to listen to it as much as I possibly can. And so especially after this horrible incident with Charlie. But anyways, so the day after Charlie was killed, Glenn Beck had a rotation of Blaze TV media personalities come on who all knew Charlie very well. And Charlie did several events with the Blaze. I think Glenn essentially viewed him as a son, and I believe Charlie looked up to Glenn as a father figure. And I know that because that's what Charlie said over and over again, I think in indirect ways, but I think that's a safe point to make. And so we had Steve on, and Steve was, again, just devastated, like everyone was. I remember I watched Glenn's entire stream, and I cried. Oh my God, I cried so much throughout that entire thing because I was so sad. And I was so sad because people like Steve and Glenn were sad, who I look up to very highly. And so Steve was invited on by Glenn to talk about Charlie and to talk about what needs to happen in the wake of Charlie's murder. And he made, I believe, one of the most profound points I've heard in the wake of the most devastating political assassination of the greater than a half century at least. And so he said that Gen X men failed Charlie Kirk. And Steve is a Gen X man. And so that was a big thing to say. And I was very curious when he said Gen X because, boomers have been targeted for criticism, Gen Z, millennials, but no one talks about Gen X. And I've always kind of wondered why that was, but I never heard someone bring it up before other than Steve. And so when he said that, I was like, oh, that's an interesting point. And so Glenn didn't have to ask him why, because Glenn just let him go, and Steve was sobbing in the middle of all this. And so he said that basically they are, and this is correct, by the way, they're the ones with the kids now out of the house. They're the ones with the discretionary income. They're the ones with the free time. But instead of stepping out in leadership and taking the mantle of the institutions of our country, deploying their capital, deploying their resources, stepping up in ministry, stepping up in basically the cultural institutions of families, of helping their children, etc. He basically said that they've checked out and they're just kind of listening to grunge and spending all their time, again, listening to Pearl Jam, going on vacation, not stepping into the community, not helping out, not helping restore the social fabric. And he compared that to Charlie, and Charlie, in theory, and I think this is correct also, Charlie had no logical reason to be doing all the things he was doing, flying to the White House, flying to Britain, he just got back from Japan, I believe, in the time he was assassinated, flying all over, being on college campuses. Charlie had 2 children under the age of 3. He was a young father. He had just gotten married, I think, 4 years ago. And when you're a young father, a young mother, you should not be in that position. There should be, this is the way healthy societies always work, by the way. If you are a young family, and Charlie, by the way, was, from all accounts, a very good, a very present father when he could be. But Charlie also had a massive organization to run. He had everything like this. And so Steve basically condemned and rebuked Gen X and said that basically Charlie should have never been in that position because people in Gen X should have taken that mantle from him. And I said, man, that's a very interesting point. That's a really insightful point. Particularly because, as I mentioned, that the 2 largest generational groups in power in this country right now, I believe, are boomers and Gen Z. I think Gen Z we've woken up the world in terms of, oh, wow, like these kids that are coming up are like really value-driven, they're really loud, they're really traditional, they really want to make noise, all that kind of thing. And then boomers are kind of the targets for everyone because, as Tim Dillon has, I think, rightly said, like they've destroyed everything good about the country. They're clinging to power, in positions of political leadership, business leadership. They're not handing down the reins to people to take over their points. And so, and then obviously the millennials are kind of the generation that everyone's like, oh yeah, like they're failures and no one wants to, no one in that generation wants to work, wants to do anything like that. And I think that's honestly kind of unfair. I think I've defended millennials a lot on my show. I think millennials got screwed over in many ways, but that's beside the point. So, but everyone talks about those generations, but no one talks about Gen X. And I always wondered why that was. And I'm just like, they're not there. They're not doing anything. That's why. Like, at least millennials and Gen X were accused of just flopping on their faces, and boomers are accused of like, no one talks about Gen X because they're like invisible. They don't do anything. And I just was like, wow. When Steve brought that up, I was like, wow, like that is really, really fascinating. And it's really hurting our country. To Steve's point, it's really hurt America that Gen X, by the way, the only generation by voting data that put Donald Trump back in the White House. So they have the same values. And I was raised by 2 Gen Xers, my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad are Gen X, and I love them. They're great. But Gen X, along with a large number of young people, are the ones that delivered the election for Donald Trump and are the most conservative generation outside of Gen Z on record. But yet they're nowhere to be found. They're not vocal. They're not, like I see this in my church as well. And my church is a younger church, mind you. But I see a lot of millennials stepping up. I see a lot of boomers stepping up. I see a lot of young people stepping up. I see barely any Gen Xers stepping up. Same is true in companies. Hardly any of them. I think Steve hit on this, and I hit on this in my monologue with people that are just shameful, like Spencer Cox. This is particularly happening on the male side of the equation, particularly with Gen X men. And I've noticed this in just looking, and I'm not trying to throw shade at anybody, but I've noticed this in some of like my dad's friends, in some of the people that are, I'm seeing this like everywhere now that Steve brought it up, and I'm seeing it everywhere. I have noticed a malaise in Gen X men. Like they're very checked out. Very checked out. They don't want anything to do with the social fabric. They don't want to volunteer in church. They don't want to step into political leadership. They don't want to run for office. They don't want to do anything. And again, Steve talked about this too. It's almost like they're too cool for school. Like someone else will take care of that. Not my problem. They're NMPs. That's what I call those people. Not my problem. Someone else will do it. Unacceptable in a democracy like ours. Unacceptable. And this mentality, someone else will take care of it, someone else will run for office, someone else will protect my church from descending into apostasy. Someone else will send that email to the principal of the school. That is a corrosive and a dangerous mentality. A very corrosive and very dangerous mentality. And I've noticed this too because, so I'm Gen Z. I was raised by two Gen Xers, and my grandparents are the silent generation. They're the generation before the boomers. And so I've noticed this trend in terms of boomers raise millennials. Boomers and millennials are both wildly screwed up in multiple ways. But Gen X and Gen Z and the silent generation above them are really doing okay. And so I was wondering I've read a lot of Jean Twenge's work. She does phenomenal stuff on generational differences, and I highly recommend all of her stuff as well. She's great. But I think the common thing that Jonathan Haidt's written about this, Greg Lukianoff has written about this, lots of people have written about this. But what people have said about Gen Z for very long is that they want everything to be safe. That's true. I've noticed that with my own friends. I've noticed that with people that I work with in the corporate space. I've noticed it with people that I just know. They want things to be safe. They want their paycheck to come in every 2 weeks. They want to have a meal plan. They want to have an exercise routine. They want to have a normal routine. They want everything to be normal. And I think that's largely because Gen X want everything to be normal. And I think it's largely because the silent generation wanted everything to be normal. And by the way, I'm not against, I know I live a very unsafe, quote unquote, unsafe life in some ways. I don't have, guaranteed income. I don't have any of that stuff. I don't have support of my health benefits, anything. And so Gen X has largely played it very safe as well. They played it very safe. They have not taken many risks, from what I can say generationally. And there's exceptions, obviously, but generationally, broad brushstrokes, they have not taken many risks. And this is good to some degree. This is good, I think, because in a way, because they valued stability. They valued raising a family in a safe home environment. They valued, routine and making sure their kids did well. Obviously, there's a horrific divorce rate among Gen X that screwed everything up. But for the families and the people that did this right, their kids are turned out really well, really well. And so that's good. And I think the same is true with Gen Z right now. They're like, I'm not trying to, be a baller on Instagram or whatever. I don't believe that I can just follow my dreams and I'll be okay in life, whatever. And so on the flip side, however, it has caused a lot of Gen X men in particular, who are the primary breadwinners still, that's a trend that I've seen, and I think the data backs this up as well, that has caused a lot of them to not boldly step out in leadership. They have not challenged for positions of leadership. They have not said, I want this. They have not been ambitious enough in terms of putting themselves out there, which has allowed selfish older people, i.e. the boomers, to hold on to the reins of power and for the younger generation to grow up without guidance, without wanting to strive, without wanting to put themselves out there. And I think this is a very loaded term, but I think it's the correct one. The biggest way this comes out for Gen X is through passivity. And Gen X men is through passivity. They just don't seem to care as much. Again, they go, that's not my problem. Like, someone else to take care of that. Oh, whatever. And again, not all Gen X men, but a lot of them. And this is wrong. And this is sinful, I believe, especially as a man. Because God created men for dominion. And now, weak men, because strong men, and I think Gen X is largely a group of very strong men in multiple ways, to give them some credit, have allowed weak men to take over institutions, which then, obviously, because weak leadership dictates the course of anything, a family, a company, a church, etc., they have driven them into the ground, our institutions, because they, Gen X men, didn't do what the prophet Ezekiel said and stand in the gap. They didn't have the nerve to stand up and stop this cultural decay that we have been facing over the longest time. Because they largely share our values in Gen Z, because they raised us. This is who we are. This is who Gen X is. This is who the silent generation is. And so this, and that's how we get men like Spencer Cox. That's exactly how we get men like Spencer Cox. And you look at all of the milk toast, the off-white, just men that are in positions of leadership, like the governor of Utah, where Charlie Kirk was just shot. And it's like, we have to do better. There's got to be something better than that, right? And there is. And there is. There are other men of that generation that can step up and lead. But they haven't. And the problem with that, Steve Deace, among other people, has charged them with, hey, you got to step up and lead. The problem is they don't have the time. It's too late for them, largely. And I'm not saying you can't run for office or start a company in your 50s or late 40s or whatever, early 60s. I think that's the gap. But it's a lot harder. So the bottom line of this is that if Gen X does not step up, then Gen Z is just going to do it for them. Like, we're not going to wait anymore. You already killed Charlie. We're not going to wait anymore. We're not going to ask permission anymore. We're just going to do it. And we've seen this betrayal of a lack of leadership, a lack of dominion, a lack of authority across all of our generations. And now it's just becoming worse and worse. And we're just not going to take it anymore. I've talked to too many people. We're just not going to take it anymore. And I think one of the biggest examples of this passivity and this lack of boldness among older men that has allowed this wild culture get way too out of control and lead to things like Charlie Kirk being assassinated is exemplified, believe it or not, in Fox News. So one of the most despicable things that I learned in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and I learned a lot of things, and I'm going to be doing several episodes in this coming up, so buckle up. It's going to get wild. And right now, at the time of this reading, I'm recording this the day after Tucker Carlson's live stream and after Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly and Tim Dillon and a bunch of people really spoke out on this. So, like, we're going to talk about all that. Trust me. I just didn't, timeline and stuff. So it was widely circulated after Charlie Kirk's assassination that Fox News had banned Charlie Kirk from going on their programs for 4 years. 4 years. Charlie Kirk was not allowed on Fox News. No one was allowed to platform him. Alongside others, such as Candace Owens. Because, why? The same exact thing that I mentioned. Because the passive, weak-willed nature of the executives at places like Fox News that are staffed with passive, weak-willed Gen X men and boomer men who didn't want Charlie or Candace to rock the boat. And the reason I found this so infuriating, of many, the primary reason, was that in the aftermath of Charlie's shooting, everyone was, oh my God, Charlie was so great. Oh my God, Charlie was like a son to me. Oh my God, Charlie was so important. If he was so important, why didn't you put him on your damn news channel? if he was so important and he was such an important voice for young people, which he was, why didn't you people put him on your shows? Why didn't you platform him? Why didn't you share his message? Because you were afraid of getting showed up by a kid? Because you were afraid of alienating some of your, again, equally passive, limp-dicked audience base over at Fox News? And you dare to come on after Charlie Kirk's assassination, where he got his neck blown off in front of 3,000 people and his wife and his kids, and cry about it? Screw you. It's despicable. Like, it's truly, truly, truly despicable. And I will have a lot more to say on this, believe me. It is unthinkable, unconscionable that they would have the gall to pull this in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk being murdered. And I've said this for years, and I think my red pill moment was after Tucker got fired. But Fox News has always been controlled opposition. They've always been controlled opposition. There is no free thinking allowed at Fox News. You know, Paul Ryan, the guy who ran with Mitt Romney, that suit puppet, that meat puppet for all of the think tanks and the Israel lobby and everything like that, all the hedge funds. You know, he's the head of the board of News Corp, which owns Fox News and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. Uh-oh. And so you do what people like Paul Ryan say, or you are going to get kicked off of the Fox News channel. By the way, which is why all of their greatest hosts have either been left or been fired, including Tucker Carlson, including Glenn Beck, including Megyn Kelly, including Bill O'Reilly. Last one, a bit skeptical because he still believes all the stuff that Fox News boomers believe, but that's beside the point. Glenn, Megyn, Tucker especially. And they are supposedly this bastion of conservative orthodoxy. It's true in one way because there's no free thinking allowed. Because if you step out of line, you are immediately put back into place. Talk to Glenn. Glenn's talked about this. Megyn's talked about this. Tucker's talked about this. If you step out of line one single inch, you're done. Talk to Dan Bongino about this. Anybody. Talk to Pete Hegseth about this. If you step out of line, you are immediately put back into place. Or you're fired. Or you're fired. Which is unfortunately what has happened to a lot of them. And this is a problem because Fox News, for the longest time up until very recently, probably last maybe not even 5 years, last couple of years, this is a massive issue because Fox News, for the longest time, was the only place where conservatives could go to have their opinions voiced. The only place. But the issue was that they didn't speak for their core audience as they changed. They just didn't do it. So if you'll notice, and I've probably watched more Fox News than most people. I haven't watched Fox News in so long. I really only watched it because of Tucker, and I liked Pete, and I like Ray Gutfeld, and Kat Timpf, and the people that are on Gutfeld's show. Didn't like anybody else, to be honest. Peter Ducey was funny. That was about it. But if you'll notice, and I've watched a bit of, I've been able to stomach a bit of Fox News ever since Charlie got shot. But if you notice all of the conformity along the lines, like what the talking points that are obviously handed down from Rupert Murdoch and Paul Ryan and the scumbags that are like that they are along the lines of not of Trump and the MAGA movement. They don't like Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, actually. That's why they kicked off all the MAGA people. That's why they kicked off Glenn. That's why they kicked off Megyn. That's why they kicked off Tucker. That's why they didn't platform Charlie or Candace. That's why. But they conform, Fox News, News Corp, alongside the people who fund and support their organization and causes. One of the things that I always like to it's always funny, and it's never changed. It's gotten worse, actually, is that if you look at the commercials for Fox News, you will see that it's nothing that is like orthodox. There's no like grocery store commercials. There's no restaurant commercials. It's all like, buy this random gun off of eBay for like $4.99 or whatever. Like these shotgun slugs are on discount for 20%. Buy gold. Right? It's like that's kind of what, and part of that's marketing to their audience and stuff. But like it's just wildly like, and it's all funded. Those are the people that control, because the advertisers control what can be said on cable news. So these are the people that hold Fox News and the personalities on Fox News by the balls. That's how they control them. That's how they have input into what they say. And I think the reason why it's important to harp on this is because Fox News could have had a massive opportunity, but they have blown it on every single occasion by turning their cheeks on Tucker, Candace, Megyn Kelly, Tucker, Glenn, and they're keeping themselves in line to satisfy people who do not care about the true cause and purpose of the movement. And this Charlie Kirk being banned from Fox News bomb that just dropped after his assassination, up until very recently, Laura Ingraham talked to him, I think, a couple days before Charlie was murdered. It's very revealing, man. It's very revealing. Tucker said this before. A lot of people have said this before too. But, you don't blame people who say things. You blame people who fund people who say those things. Follow the money. It's the oldest trick in the book. And it works almost every time. Don't look at what Laura Ingraham says, or what Sean Hannity says, or what Jesse Waters says, or what Harris Faulkner says. Look at what the people who are handling their contracts and paying them say. And look at who they are getting funded to draw those contracts up to people like the hosts to say. It tells you everything you need to know. Follow the money. It works every time. And it's just, it's really despicable and disgusting that they're not conservative at all. They're not. Because every single cause of conservatism as defined now is kicked off and booted. So just something to keep aware of if you're an avid Fox News listener or watcher. And I think there's the perfect example of what we've been talking about, this kind of like this lack of leadership, this milquetoast thing, is the response. I'll turn away from the men for a second. I'll give the men for a break. I'm going to talk about two women now. Is the contrast between the mentality of someone like Katie Britt, who's a senator, very prominent senator. She was almost, I believe, Trump's vice president. Thank God he picked J.D. Vance. Versus Erika Kirk. So I will admit, it took me about a week to watch Erika Kirk's address. I didn't think I could make it through. I didn't think I could stomach it. I thought I'd get nauseous if I watched it. And that's weakness on my part, because obviously her husband just got shot and she got up there. And so I was like, I don't know what I was waiting for, really. I kind of just wanted to, I just didn't think I could emotionally handle it and process it. And so I had no idea that she was going to go live after Charlie's death, especially so quickly. And it caught everybody off guard. And I was at my church on Friday night for a recording they were doing. We have a podcast at our church. They wanted to do a recording. This was before Charlie got assassinated, and they thought it could be something to up the mood, and it was. And I had a good time, and it was fun. And on the way home, I had discovered that Erika Kirk had went live on X and on Rumble and on YouTube, and she had it live streamed from Charlie's podcast studio at Turning Point in Phoenix. And I got to admit, man, it was one of the most impressive things I have ever seen. It was one of the most stunning displays of leadership in the face of just unspeakable adversity, demonic adversity that had literally just hit her, hit her family. And and people were saying this on Friday when Erika came out and addressed the nation And people were saying like, oh my God, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And I said, okay, like it's, whatever. I talked to my friend Taylor Higgins, about it. And she said like, it was very scripted, obviously, because I think if she didn't script it, she would start breaking down and crying, which I think that's true with anyone with a soul. And I was like, but okay, like I want to see it for myself. I saw it for myself and I agreed. Like the amount of boldness, of courage, of resolve in Erika Kirk, in that woman is extraordinary. Just absolutely extraordinary. She had every reason to cower, to shrink away, but she didn't. She didn't. And instead she did the opposite of that, actually. So if you haven't watched it, it's essentially split into two parts. The first half was about her talking about her husband, about Charlie, and it was very sweet, very sad, and lovely, honestly. Like, she talked a lot about who Charlie was, and I thought that was something that most people did a very good job of. They talked about who Charlie was. And then the second part of it was a declaration of war. It was like Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens when he said, when he's looking at the burned Darth Vader mask, and basically he said, I will finish what you started. And that's what she's going to do. If I had any sway in it, she would be the CEO, the CEO of Turning Point USA, like yesterday. She is the person that needs to be in that position of leadership. She absolutely is. And so that's beside the point. I don't want to make this about that at this point. But it was exactly what we needed to hear. It was a statement of mourning. It was a statement of sadness. It was a statement of just tragedy. But also, it is not okay to stay in that place of tragedy, in that place of sadness, mourning forever. And we're going to be there for a while, I think, because the mourning for Charlie is not over by any stretch of the imagination. It's not for me. It's not for anyone I've talked to. So, but we have to mobilize and we have to move forward. And I agree, which is why I'm doing a lot of the things that I'm doing, and why we're being so targeted with the show and addressing some of these things, like the male leadership gap in Gen X. But on the other hand, this is another thing that sickened me. When there's an Erika Kirk, who, again, does one of the most incredible things I've ever seen any person do ever, we have people like Katie Britt. The same milquetoast, Gen X, conservative response. And I won't quote her directly, but the big theme of what she said, and she's a leader in the Senate in multiple things, she said we must find unity and come together. Nope. No. If I wasn't trying to tame my tongue, I would swear. I would say F no. There is no unity with these people that killed Charlie. No matter where they come from or who they are, and there's a lot coming out about that. There is no unity with people who kill Charlie Kirk. Sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry. There's no unity in this country with people who want to kill us. Steve Deace calls this political sadism. He's absolutely right. There is no unity with political sadism. We must purge it. As equally on the side as there is this weak-willed leadership class that we must get rid of immediately, there is also people who want to use violence to harm people. Both of them must be taken out. Both of them. Peacefully. But we must purge it. Because this is exactly what the demonic, evil people that killed Charlie Kirk and would want a lot of us dead as well want to hear. Which is why we cannot allow it to happen. And this mentality from people like Katie Britt is exactly what got American values put through a paper shredder for years. It's exactly why we have not gotten any momentum up until Donald Trump. Why we need to put an end to it immediately if we are going to have any momentum going forward. This is just a moment. Charlie's funeral at the time of this recording is on Sunday. The time is now. The time is absolutely now. But if we let this be a spark and not a fire, then we're going to go back to the exact same place. Only this time we won't have one of our best generals. We won't have Charlie Kirk with us. So this is, and we've heard this from people like James Lankford. We've heard this from people like Katie Britt, all these despicable people that just need to go. This is not a both sides issue. This threat of political violence is not a both sides issue. We need to get that out of our heads. And I will put it very plainly to everyone watching this. We are fighting people that literally want to kill us and that did kill Charlie. That's who we're up against. And they would kill you too. If you were in a similar position, if you were Charlie Kirk, they'd kill me. They certainly would kill me. They'd probably kill you too if you were as bold as Charlie was about the values he espoused. I see evidence for that. We have evidence for that. Charlie's funeral, again, is on Sunday at the time of this recording. This is not peacetime anymore. We are at war inside of our own country. This is not the time for peace. This is a bold declaration of war. What Erika Kirk said is right. We need to fight these people. We need to stamp out this political sadism. We need to stamp out this neutrality nonsense. This is a time for boldly asserting our values forward for everyone to see and to persuade people with empathy, just as Charlie did for his entire career. We cannot be authoritarian about this, dictatorial about this. No. We need to be bold about it, like Charlie was, and then persuade people, like Charlie did. And look what he did. He won over Gen Z. The voting data proves that. We must fight this. This is not a both sides issue. The other side wants to kill us. They tried to do it with Trump twice. They successfully did it with Charlie. This is not a both sides issue. You are in a war. You are in a fight, whether you want to admit it or not, you are in one. Congratulations. Pick up your musket and charge the hill. No more of this Katie Britt, unity, come together. We're all the same. No, we are not. Like Kendrick Lamar said, they ain't like us. They are not like us. And they never were. It just took Charlie taking a bullet in the throat to teach us that lesson the hard way. So the best way we can honor that is by fighting, by pushing back. And fight we will. So to fight, I want to reference a famous clip of Candace Owens when she was still with the Daily Wire, LOL. That's a long time ago at this point. A famous clip of Candace Owens when they were doing one of their backstage live events. I believe this might have been at the Ryman. They've done a lot of backstage events at the Ryman Theater in Nashville, which is a very famous music venue, theater venue, bunch of different things. And so what's interesting was that it's the host. They all gather together. They smoke cigars and they drink whiskey and whatever. I was like, Candace is out of place there anyway. Like when I watched it, I was like, that's kind of weird. But anyway, and I didn't watch the backstage. I was a member of the Daily Wire back then. I'm not now. But there was this clip that went kind of viral afterwards, and I thought it was really fascinating. And so it was a clip of Candace Owens rebuking Matt Walsh, who was... I thought that was really interesting because Matt Walsh and Candace are really good friends. To this day, they're very good friends. And there is no one that agrees with Candace more than Matt Walsh. There is no one that agrees with Matt Walsh more than Candace Owens. They were very, very close, and they still are very close. And they're good friends to this day. And so, Walsh was saying something akin to like, well, you're straight white male, like, blah, 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 like, you're there, you're going to be a target, you're going to be a threat, whatever. And Candace just stopped him. And she was basically like, no, stop pulling that card. Do not pull that card. Stop apologizing. Stop complaining. Stop blaming wokeness. And man up, put your big boy pants on and do something about it. She said, I'm sick and tired of straight white men complaining about woke culture. And I saw that, and I was like, thank God. Thank God someone said that. And I'm a straight white man. Thank God someone said that we shouldn't be quivering in our boots and complaining and moaning about all of our quote-unquote problems, which really aren't problems at all. It's just like, so I saw that and I was like, man, that is so refreshing to hear. And I want to reframe that and put it very, very plainly. So for young people, for men, young men especially, men like Charlie Kirk in that demographic of straight white Christian men, but all people, all men in general. I will say men in general. But if you're still thinking that matters, it doesn't matter anymore. This wokeness, oh my God, like they hate me because I'm white. Like, get that out of your head. It sucks. It doesn't do anything for you. So this is, I believe, the greatest charge of leadership that we have faced since the Second World War. This leadership gap that is coming to a head right now. We have inherited, as men, a culture that has been abdicated by masculine responsibility. We need to pick up the baton and run through the tape with everything that we have. No one else is going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. I made an episode about this a couple weeks ago. I'll reiterate it again. It's not okay to be soft. It's not okay to be a victim. Oh my God, they hate me for XYZ reason. Shut up. Shut up. I don't care why they hate you. They probably don't, by the way. But they do hate you in all the ways that you're not thinking of. Oh my God, it's my skin color. Oh my God, my professor's woke. Shut up. Man up. Grow up. Don't go to college, by the way. This gap can only be filled by strong men, this leadership gap that we're facing right now. And I love my dad. I talk to my dad almost every single day. My dad was the best worldly dad I could have ever asked for. I'm talking generally about Gen X men for Gen Z here. We must lead where our fathers didn't. We need to step up in the ways that they did not. And we should not, by the way, condemn them for this, okay? But we also should acknowledge that the bar and the standard for male leadership must be raised. So this culture, this demonic culture that's actively trying to kill us right now, rights itself, and we build a future for our children so they can have a future that is better than the one we are currently experiencing right now. This is the first generation on record, Gen Z, that is not doing as well as their parents. The first generation on record that is just missing out on everything. And this is an indictment and a sin on our culture. When your young people in a society cannot buy a home, when they cannot get married, when they have to worry about having kids, when they buy everything on BNPL solutions, when they have to finance their DoorDash. That is the fault of the older generations to not prepare a world for the younger generations. And it's our responsibility as well to fix that. Because if I can fix it, anyone can fix it. But what this is commanding us to say, we are not on my watch. We cannot let this happen again. Can never let it happen again. We need to go. We need to go. We cannot pull the woke card anymore. We cannot complain about the things we cannot control anymore. As men, as young Gen Z men, particularly young Gen Z Christian men, particularly young Gen Z Christian conservative men, we must become so undeniably excellent, so in shape, so wealthy, so righteous, so God-fearing, so involved in our community, so great with our wives and our children, so pursuing marriage, so running for office, so going for that promotion, so talking about the gospel, that we have no choice but to get what is coming to us in the best way possible. And to make America what it should be for everyone that comes after us. Weak societies fail because of weak leadership. We cannot let that happen again. And in my place, my power, my authority, I will do my part, and I believe many others will as well, so that it won't. But I leave that charge to you. Thank you all for watching. Own the day. Open your mind. I'll see you next week.